We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we continue to be joined by Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Now, Dave, thanks for sticking with us. Earlier in the show, we were talking about these government agencies, federal agencies, that are likely to face, let's call it a root and branch reform, courtesy of incoming President Donald Trump. But I'd like to more sort of move into speaking about how Donald Trump is going to forcefully try and apply his mandate. Now, we've discussed this off camera about the mandate. So at time of recording, obviously, he has 312 electoral college votes. He has the popular vote. He has an increase in the Senate, which flipped to, will flip when everybody's on board, to Republican control. And although AP News hasn't called this at time of recording, there's other places have. He now has a majority in the House as well. So how do you think he's going to use that mandate moving forward?
Well, I think, first of all, he's going to be more intrusive into the congressional machinery than most presidents. And most presidents don't do that because they don't have the cachet to do it. But I think that Donald Trump believes he does. He has this notion, and one that I actually personally agree with, which is management by a single alternative. At any rate, I think that what Trump is going to do in terms of the bureaucracy is he is going to decide what it is that he wants to do. He's going to make it perfectly clear, and you should not get in his way. And I think that's perfectly acceptable for a bureaucracy that has been traditionally anti-Trump. And even in the first administration, it was clear that the tide was not with President Trump at the time, and there were all manner of people and never Trumpers and Russia, and all that kind of stuff that were distractions. But even with all those distractions, he got an enormous amount accomplished. And I think that he now knows that he is not going to be persuaded by distractions. And you let somebody else take care of that. You are focused on getting what you promised the people, and you're going to have energy independence again. You're going to close the border, and you've got two people now with Homan and Noam who will be on your side to do that. And they're both focused on the very same thing that you are, closing that border. And I think that Kristi Noem will also solve your FEMA problem for you by cleaning that house. And there will no longer be the mission of FEMA as diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is not an option, which is in their strategy.
Yeah, it is notable that even private corporations are now pulling back from the DEI mantra. Now, that actually started well before this 2024 election heated up. And it looks like it's because it's been affecting their performance and their bottom line. And they do. Obviously, they have that responsibility to the shareholders. But we're seeing a lot of these, I don't want to call them structures, but maybe I will call them structures, but these edifices, that's the better way to look at it. So you've had the DEI, you've had the electric vehicle mandate, all of these things that have sort of grown in the last 6, 7, 8 years to become the pinnacles of, or the pillars which girded the Biden administration, the now outgoing Biden administration. And they seem to be crumbling, as edifices often do. And they seem to be crumbling, but not because of any pushback from a well-organized political right, because let's be clear, there isn't, and there hasn't been for a long time, a well-organized political right, except for perhaps Donald Trump's most recent campaign team, which is a bit of an oddity, which I'd love to get further into. But they're crumbling under their own weight. And so it's not, I don't think it's going to be a case that Donald Trump if he chooses to, if his administration chooses to go in and start tearing these things down, because they appear to be crumbling by themselves. What's your take on that?
No, I think that's true. And of course, the reason they're crumbling by themselves is because they had no support from the citizenry of the the United States. Because these were things that were forced on the people by the, I hate this term, because elite gives them some sort of cachet that they don't deserve. But the fact is that they come up with these ideas and they know they're better, and they're going to force them on the people because they know better than the people who elected them. And so that's where you get the electric vehicle mandate. The reason that all these things are crumbling is because they have no popular support. And if things are going to cost me money, then you better ask me and get my approval to support them. I mean, $7 billion and we have, or $1 billion and we have 7 charging stations. I mean, that's really exciting. But it's perfectly consistent with Harris's use of her money, where she's now broke. And so
her campaign,
yeah, right.
I'm sure individually she's doing absolutely
I
fine.
suspect that she'll probably become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. No, she won't. I'm kidding. They've got more sense than that.
Just to clarify what you mentioned there, Dave, for anybody who didn't know, the Kamala Harris campaign spent over $1 billion to win the election, which is quite the sum. That and a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, but a certain percentage of it went on paying for these celebrity endorsements. Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Productions got $1 million, which, as far as I know, Oprah Winfrey's a billionaire and she doesn't need the money, and yet her company chose to take $1 million of this cash that's come in order to appear for Kamala Harris. And so there's actually a lot of talk about who else got paid to do an appearance, and yet it was all unsuccessful ultimately. And her campaign is reportedly in over $20 million of debt. And so there are vendors who are going to be waiting a long time for that money. I believe Donald Trump has very generously offered to figure out a way to pay those vendors off so they don't get negatively impacted by it. But sorry to interrupt. Please carry on with your...
No, but all of these things are absolutely emblematic of the liberal mindset, where do what we say, don't do what we do, because what we do we can't at all justify, but we know that we're right when we tell you to do things. There's in Washington, D.C., I talk about this occasionally, but there are several forms of lying. One of the forms of lying is that you tell somebody something that is absolutely untrue, and we call that a real lie. Then you have people who talk to you and tell you things that, to the best of their knowledge, is true, but they aren't. And then you have the last, which is the most prevalent, and that is people who tell you things that they wish were true. And this is emblematic of liberals. They tell you things that they wished were true because they have a worldview that is totally inconsistent with reality.
You know what? I would say that expands across the political divide, because there's hopes, dreams, and unrealistic expectations on every side of the political compass there. But yeah, David, it really does seem to me that your points about the air quotes elites thing here, it's almost like they're trying to create an intellectual hegemony, but they lack the basic. Let's be clear, it's either the intellect or the support to sustain such a hegemony, and I think that became very apparent in these last couple of weeks. Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark. Always fun to talk to you.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to take a moment to thank our guests today, economics guru Andrew Moran, national security correspondent Dave Patterson, and of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners, who tune in each and every week to make this thing possible. And remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.